You don't know about these additives because the wine industry has spent tens of millions of dollars in lobby money with their friends in Washington, D.C. to keep contents labeling off of wine. Wine is the only major food product without a contents label, and that's not an accident. The wine industry regularly lobbies to keep these efforts down to put a contents label on it because the wine industry does not want you to know what's really in it.
Right. Even like the carb content, it is always very interesting. Every other liquid, there's
fat, no nutritional,
there's
no nutritional profile required.
Yep.
And many wines contain sugar and a lot of sugar.
Welcome to the HVMN podcast. This is your host, Geoff Woo, and thank you for tuning in. This is a fun episode for our 21 and older listeners. Let's raise our glasses and toast Todd White, CEO of Dry Farm Wines, to the program. Dry Farm Wines is known as a biohacking friendly wine. Is that even a real thing? Todd's quite a biohacker and deep into the ketogenic diet and fasting. We start off our conversation by first diving into the cognitive benefits of the ketogenic diet and explore Todd's other biohacks. And then we move into the meat of the episode, wine. Let's get real. Alcohol is a neurotoxin and is not great for performance. I've personally limited my consumption to about one drink every couple of months. So why would a self-proclaimed biohacker and health-conscious person like Todd make a company around it? That's what we hope to answer here. More broadly, what are some of the dirty secrets and production loopholes of the wine industry? And how can a wine become sugar-free and keto-friendly? Todd and I explore all these topics and much more. If you enjoy this episode and feel like Dry Farm Wines is a product that fits your lifestyle well, visit www.dryfarmwines.com/HVMN. Through that link, Todd has been kind enough to hook you up with a 1 penny bottle. That's right, a 1 penny bottle of wine along with your purchase. Without further ado, let's get into the episode. Todd, welcome to our San Francisco headquarters.
I am super happy to be here. I spent the night in San Francisco last night and just a few blocks away.
Okay.
So enjoyed a brisk walk here.
Yeah, it's a little bit foggy today, but at least you're missing a lot of like the big rain that was happening over the last couple of weeks.
I brought my dog, so I was out in the rain this morning just a bit. It's misting, but it's cleared off now.
Yeah. So you have a very interesting background, a serial entrepreneur, been in the real estate game, and then been quite a constant biohacker over the last, 5-6 decade or so?
Well, I would say I was a biohacker before it was called biohacking.
Okay.
So probably been active, really seriously focused for probably 15 years, maybe a little bit longer, 16, 17
so
years.
So early 2000s.
Yeah.
And what instigated you to go on that journey?
I've always been a lifelong learner and curious experimenter. I started experimenting with the Atkins diet, actually, was sort of what led me down the path. And using it as a weight loss tool. Not fully understanding at that time, nor did anyone else really about ketosis and the benefit of being ketotic. And, although Atkins was the leader in the ketogenic diet. So at that time, there was not really, there weren't any methods to accurately or easily measure ketones other than the urine sticks, which he recommended. He talked about ketosis, but it just wasn't really a thing. But so I started experimenting with it to manage weight loss.
So were you coming into it from a weight perspective? I mean, today
I was initially.
You look, quite trim and fit. So I'm just curious.
I've been fully ketotic for about 5 years now, so I'm very lean.
Yeah.
Even I have the sweater and things on today, but I'm super lean and have been for many years now. But I have a body type that can struggle with pesky weight gain.
Okay, so early 2000s.
I'm carbohydrate intolerant.
Okay.
And so, so I started experimenting, and then from there it became really quite serious about 5 or 6 years ago when I kind of went full in on a regular meditation practice, a cold thermogenesis, ketogenic diet, regular fasting, right? So these protocols really got very, very serious about 5 years ago.
And what triggered that? So it sounded like the initial exploration was around weight management, and it seemed like you got some value insight there. And then do you remember there was a trigger moment 5 years ago where it's like, okay, I want to spend even more time going down this rabbit hole?
I think it was really the cognitive benefits of two experiments. One, meditation, and two, the ketogenic diet.
Okay.
And when I say cognitive benefits, so initially I experimented with keto to lose weight. After the weight loss was successful, or I reached a point where I just stabilized and didn't lose any more weight, then I really continued the protocol for the cognitive benefits. And so I was seeing a really remarkable increase in things like short-term memory and energy and other benefits, other cognitive benefits, both with meditation as well as the ketogenic diet. So, and I've just maintained now, as we were discussing earlier, now I have sort of moved my focus from keto, which is just sort of a lifestyle, to a pretty meaningful fasting regimen.
Which I think is interesting. I think if you talk to folks in this broader community of low carb or keto, I think there's probably a camp. It's split into two camps. One camp that started from a weight management perspective coming into this community. And I would say the other half, which I think is more recent, is people looking for performance. And I would say that that's kind of my school of how I entered in the ketogenic low carb area, where I've always been fairly lean, and I didn't look at this as a way to manage weight. It was like, okay, there's interesting data and anecdotes from a performance perspective, and the data seem reasonable. Why does this even work? So it sounded like we're coming at the same metabolic intervention from kind of two different starting places, but are very much seeking, I think, the same things now, which is probably, I would imagine, relating to performance, longevity, and the happy medium between those two.
When you say performance, for me, I'm an athlete, and there's certainly benefit to my athletic performance from a ketogenic lifestyle, but the real performance I'm interested in is cognition, right? And then, as you mentioned, not only longevity, but managing the aging process. So we know categorically that both calorie restriction as well as ketogenic diet significantly reduces inflammation and significantly slows down or even reverses aging. I mean, I can look at someone, even a young person. Nearly everyone on my staff is keto, or certainly low carb. Most are keto, and most are active in some kind of fasting protocol. But when they show up as a new hire, and I watch them how they transform, even when they're young, and even when they're already lean, and you see them go keto or adapt a fasting program, you'll see a change in their facial structure that. Again, these are people who are lean, but you'll see a change in their facial structure where they're just losing inflammation. And when I look at photographs of myself, even 6 or 8 years ago, just before I became ketogenic, you can see kind of just what I call kind of a melon head. You know, you're just
a little
puffy.
Puffy, right?
Yeah,
No,
you're just puffy.
Yeah. I think I've noticed that in myself. I think just anecdote, N equals 1 personally. You know, I've been somewhat lean, but I think the body composition is much better in terms of much less adipose tissue around your abdominal areas. I think the face leans out a little bit. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah, you can. So when I meet people, we're the official wine for 170 health and performance events around the United States. We have 4 this weekend. So when I meet people at conferences and they tell me they're keto, I can look at them and know whether they're ketogenic or not. And many people who say they're keto, unfortunately, are not really keto.
Yeah.
And either they're delusional or they just don't know, or maybe they're selling or marketing some product that is in the ketogenic space and they claim to be ketogenic. But you can look at someone, you can look at their face and tell whether they're keto.
Or you can smell out their breath, maybe.
Well, I don't get that close to them, but you can usually look at them and see.
Yeah. So it sounds like you really tapped into it from a subjective cognitive space. Were you quantitative in terms of looking at, finger sticking in terms of blood? Were you doing lipid panels through vein draws? I mean, obviously I think a lot of value can be gained from the subjective experiential benefits of being in a ketotic state or being in a fasted state. I'm curious, how much did you weigh from the experiential side? How much did you weigh from a quantitative biomarker side? Or both?
Both. I've been tracking my blood panels for probably since 2008, 2007 or 2008, regularly, a couple times a year. I experimented with, and still do from time to time, with pricking my finger for BHB, but I don't do it often. It's unpleasant.
Yeah.
Your fingers bruise over time. I don't do it often because I don't really need to, because I know I'm in ketosis. It's not really important to me to be in the contest of whether I'm at, 1.2 millimolars or 2.8. During extended fasting, 5 or 7 day fast, I will oftentimes measure ketones during that phase to sort of, one of the things I find interesting about the biomarker, measuring my ketones, is this relationship between how I feel, right, and where my ketone levels are. And so I sometimes manage during extended fast, or if I'm experimenting with a food type. I give you an example. While this is not by any means a healthy pursuit, I happen to like French fries. Now,
I like French fries too.
The primary problem with them is the seed oils that they're usually fried in.
Okay.
But, if we look back ancestrally and even back to, quote unquote paleo, right? We were eating a lot of tubulars and we were eating in-ground starches, although, they do have an effect on your carbohydrate intake,
right?
And they can convert to pretty quickly to blood glucose. So if I want to experiment with something like French fries, then I will do food experiments to see what my tolerance is to stay in nutritional ketosis, which I consider to be 1.0, 1 millimolar,
which is still
or
pretty
higher.
High keto level. And
I feel my best between 1.2 and 2.2 millimolar is where I'm in kind of my peak performance. Once I get up in the high 2s, 3, 4, 5 millimolar, I find that the focus level, the cognitive response is so myopic. I get kind of in a tunnel state where flow state becomes very, very intense and very narrow. I can't see things around me and I don't really enjoy that. While I think it could have some temporary benefit if you were working on some specific project.
Right.
It could have some temporary benefit, but I don't enjoy the day in and day out experience of that kind of tunneled myopic view.
Right. And which it's also hard to sustain at a 3.0 millimole range as well.
I don't enjoy the way it feels.
Okay.
And so as a biohacker, I oftentimes refer and default to the proverb, to feel is to understand. Because many of the practices that biohackers engage in, there's not, and this is certainly true, particularly of nutrition, because we don't really have any control group studies on nutrition, because unless we're going to jail people, there's not any ethical way to get really quality information there.
It's all epidemiological.
Right. So oftentimes when there's not data to support our practices, then we have to default to how we feel, right? And to feel is to truly understand. And once we're in touch with our body and we understand what that feels like most people have no idea what it really feels like to feel great, right? This is this human condition, just like even like wine as an example. which we might even talk about wine today.
Yeah, let's get it. I mean, we will, definitely.
But even with wine, when people drink conventional wines that they see in their store or in the restaurant, they think that's just what wine makes them feel like. And they think that's what wine tastes like. That's actually not what real wine tastes like or makes you feel like.
Right.
Right. And so until you get away from this conditioning, same thing for most people who are eating the standard American diet, the SAD diet. They have no idea what it feels like to eat in a way that our body will respond, in a favorable way. They just don't have any idea. I mean, this neurotoxin that is sugar.
Yeah.
I mean, it would be hard to imagine that sugar would be legal today.
Yeah. One of the things that I found interesting is that there's been an increase in backlash or pushback from popular media against fasting or keto. I think I just talked to a reporter from Guardian last week. Then an article came out about the extreme fasting of Silicon Valley or biohackers. And then I think I almost revert back to the point that there's also no data on the standard American diet, the standard Western diet, and how terrible that is. I mean, the data point there is that everyone's getting diabetic and obese. And that's what I consider almost disordered eating, as opposed to the default. If that's the default, that is creating something terrible. You gotta let people experiment and see what works for them. And like just critiquing people searching or experimenting themselves seems to be overly conservative at best or really harmful at worst.
Yeah, I think the data points that we have on the Western diet is where it's now pervasive throughout the world, or most all of the world, but where we have instances of, Western diet coming to places where they had ancestral diets and seeing that where there was virtually no heart disease or no diabetes or very low rates of cancer, right? And then we see this kind of spike and explosion in Western chronic diseases where the diet has been adapted. I think that's pretty clear.
Yeah, Gary Taubes he was on a podcast, and I think he explains that very well in his books.
But if we pull back and we, experiment with things like elimination diets, or, we pull back and kind of everybody's different. So there's not a prescription. There's not a dietary prescription for everyone.
Yeah.
I think the curious learners and the people who want to self-experiment, the biohackers, if you will, which is a pretty growing movement.
Yeah.
I don't understand I don't understand the press and the traditional media, traditional medicine, their obsession with, the dangers of the ketogenic diet. I don't see any anecdotal evidence to support it at all.
Right.
I traveled to virtually every ketogenic conference in the United States and have a lot of experience with keto and a lot of experience seeing other people adapt it. I'm talking about like authentically adapt it.
Yeah.
If you're not doing blood testing, you could start off with the urine sticks, which is good and well, but if you are seriously committed to a ketogenic diet and ketogenic lifestyle, then you're going to have some period of measurement.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is this sort of cycling in and out seems to be quite popular, but from my perspective, particularly as someone who's engaged in regular fasting, until you become fat adaptive, which is a 4 to 8 week process, of pretty strict compliance, until you become fat adaptive and really retrain your body, I think being keto is quite uncomfortable. And
or the adaptation period is quite uncomfortable, but once you're there,
it can be. But once you adapt,
then it's quite smooth.
It's quite easy, and it also makes fasting quite easy.
Yep.
And people who try to fast who are not keto, I remember fasting a few times when I was younger, and not being keto is quite unpleasant.
Yeah, that's the hangriness feeling, or you're just angry, or just lightheaded.
Just angry.
Yeah.
In fact, when I would cycle in and off of what was then the ketogenic diet, my staff at the time, when I would cycle in and out of Atkins, just using it to kind of ratchet back weight. So I'd go on Atkins for like a couple of weeks,
Right.
Lose 8-10 pounds and go back to standard diet. And my staff would, I would kind of have to warn them that I was going to be dieting.
Yeah.
Because I would just be angry.
I want to circle back to one of your points around how you feel as a really good benchmark. I think that's the right way I think people should treat it. I think like ideally you have all the metrics that quantify and justify how you're feeling. But I think people shouldn't be afraid to just realize, hey, like I feel good or bad on this kind of intervention. And that should be your initial template. And I think if you really want to take it to the next level in terms of just realizing, hey, is this a little bit of a placebo effect or not? Then I think adding the quantitative markers, I think as you get more curious is important. But I think just from a broad perspective of how we take the movement from, niche audiences and how we get this to everyone in the world eventually, hopefully, allowing these different shades of how one can enter the community, I think is probably productive.
Yeah, I would like to see a widespread adoption of ketogenic diet, but I'm not sure that's going to happen. It's very difficult for people to comply for whatever reason.
Well, just that there's so much easy standard Western diet snacks everywhere.
There is, and there's also a social stigma associated for many, many people. This is not true for me, probably not true for you. Everyone I'm surrounded around is professionally and socially is adaptive of biohacking or a healthier lifestyle. But for most people, particularly in their work environment, there's a tremendous amount of stigma associated with being different.
Yeah.
Right. And it's also very difficult. I remember when my last business, which is 5 or 6 years ago, it was in a more traditional office setting where there was the break room. And while I wasn't keto at that time, but I was certainly low carb and certainly sensitive to my sugar intake. But it was always somebody's birthday, or vendors would bring donuts and bagels and and orange juice, for God's sakes, right, into the office setting. And so, when you walk past these things like somebody's birthday cake, and it's just super easy, just like take a little pinch.
Yeah.
And people they're ridiculed for not participating. And
a lot of peer pressure.
Right. So it's very difficult. And also for people with kids or, with a spouse that's not compliant, it's very, very difficult when these things are in your house. Ben Greenfield was at my house recently. We did his podcast outside, and he came in and he wanted like a snack, or he was like wanted something to eat before we recorded. I didn't have anything in the house to eat. I had one bag of pork rinds and a bag of almonds.
Yeah.
And that's what but he just remarked, and I hadn't really thought about it, there's just nothing in my house to eat, right? And so I live alone, and there's not, I just don't keep food there. I rarely eat there. And if I do, I shop to eat.
Yeah.
Right? And I certainly don't have any kind of snack type products.
That's like kind of similar to me. I like kind of the only snack things I'll have is like either cheese, pork rinds, almonds, nuts. And then I know that when I have some holiday chocolates laying around and it's like there, it makes it so much easier, or you're just tempted to go towards it. So if you have I just don't have anything there on the table.
So I wasn't really conscious. It's just that it was just the result of not buying anything. It wasn't really planned. I don't snack, so I don't have any reason to have those things around.
So I want to get to your current protocol. So it sounds like you've really been experimenting for a bunch of different methods, interventions. Now, what is your today's, what is Todd doing on a consistent basis now? Like, what things that you tried in the past you thought were not validated, not interesting, overhyped, kind of BS? What things have really stuck with you as something that you think are legitimate and something that's added a lot of value to your life?
The only thing I've changed that I think didn't make me feel optimal was I cut back saturated fat. I'm not here to argue its benefits or its inherent dangers. Just the way it made me feel. So I was early on in keto, and for quite some time, I had a much higher intake of saturated fat. Today, that my fat intake is primarily olive oil and tallow and butter, which the tallow and the butter obviously are saturated,
right.
but I'm not taking in high amounts of saturated fat.
Okay. So are you cutting back on red meat as well?
I feel better not eating it.
Okay.
It's not, I still eat it. I eat it on a regular basis. We could talk about my moral objections around it, and the way animals are treated is morally just incomprehensible. But aside from that,
and I think it's an interesting discussion where I think people never address it separately. I think there's definitely a moral question around eating other mammals, but I think this should be orthogonal to the health impact. And I think people kind of conflate the two. But I think that's something interesting.
Well, I'm still eating it in spite of the incomprehensible moral conflict I find with the cruelty of the way these animals are treated. I still eat it anyway.
Yeah.
I just feel better if I eat it less often.
Okay.
So an ideal diet for me is sort of plant and fish, and a liberal dose of high-quality olive oil.
Mm-hmm.
I eat a little bit of coconut oil, but I used to eat a lot more.
Yeah.
And I used to drink a lot of fat.
Okay.
Right?
It's like MCT oils or?
Coffee, fatted coffee I don't drink anymore. Primarily because I do 22-hour, 23-hour fasting daily. So I don't take, except a little bit of coffee and green tea, I don't take in any other forms of anything in my body other than water, primarily green tea, and occasionally a cup of coffee.
Okay.
But no fat during the daytime.
Interesting. So that's, not trivial to take most of your fat from plant and fish. So are you eating a lot of avocados, nuts? Those tend to be your sort of fat sources.
Avocados and nuts, both. A lot of fatty fish, a lot of olive oil.
Okay.
But I just, in terms of that's nutritionally, I just found, I also stopped taking most supplements. I used to take, this massive handful of, some 20 or 30 supplements a day. I discontinued that 4 or 5 years ago. I actually found that I felt better not taking them. I felt like they were a toll. The processing of them just felt to be a toll on my body. So now I take NAD and some mineral supplements, but not taking this massive handful of, this, that, and the other that had accumulated over a number of years. But other than some really expensive urine, I just wasn't feeling that they were benefiting me. And I just felt like the toll of processing on my body when I quit taking them, I just felt like that processing toll was much lower.
Yeah, I agree. So, I think a lot of supplements are just like a kitchen sink in there. And if you want something specific, just get the something specific as opposed to having 30 things in your hand. I think that makes a lot of sense.
That's just my experience. Again, you experiment with different things. When I cut back, my fat intake with ketogenic diet was just much higher. Mm-hmm. It's lower today than it was historically. I feel better not eating so much fat. Whether or not it's healthy or unhealthy, I'm not here to argue that point one way or the other. I think there's plenty of data to show that moderate to moderately high fat intake is perfectly healthy.
Yeah.
It's just the way high intake of saturated fat was making me feel personally.
Right. Yep.
Right. And so basically I get up, I have a cup of green tea in the morning, and first thing I do, whether I'm in a hotel room as I was last night or at home, I make my bed, right, to add order to the room and a sense of, an early win.
Yeah.
I really like the order that it creates within the room. Anyway, I make my bed. I meditate for about 40 minutes. And
right in the morning?
Yes. Yeah, first thing in the morning. My staff then also meditates together when we meet at 10 a.m. We don't meet until 10. Everybody has protecting their mornings. And then from 10 to 11, my staff also meditates together. But most of us, myself included, have an individual meditation practice that I meditate usually about 7 o'clock in the morning, between 6 and 7. Mm-hmm. I have a 40-minute session. And
you meditate again with your staff between 10 and 11.
I do. And then I begin with a cup of green tea, and I fast. Occasionally I have a cup of coffee, not daily, but and then I eat between 6 and 7 at night. And that generally includes a bottle of wine.
I want to get to the wine story because I think that's interesting. So that's a pretty interesting schedule. So ketogenic diet plus regular sort of OMAD, 1 meal a day style fasting. And I want to just clarify for our listeners here, when Todd's talking about lowering saturated fat intake, you're probably then boosting up monounsaturated fat in terms of nuts, more of the vegetable. But it sounds like you still are avoiding a lot of the seed oils, right? Like the PUFAs.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay.
For sure. Except in the occasional indulgence of French fries.
Okay.
Which I know are fried in unhealthy fats. But other than that, I don't eat them at all. I eat a lot of olive oil. I've always liked the taste of high quality fresh olive oil.
Yeah.
It's just
you just drinking it straight?
No, with vegetables or fish or, I eat probably more akin to a Mediterranean diet is sort of what I love. The Mediterranean. I love the food there. I love the diet. Grilled fish, grilled vegetables, roasted vegetables, sauteed olive oil, garlic, just sort of very, very Mediterranean.
Hey listeners, Jeff here with Brianna.
Hello.
Bri and I have very much enjoyed the journey that is this podcast and the HVMN YouTube channel. It's been a lot of fun reading your comments and thoughts.
Trust us, we've been reading them. We've seen an influx of feedback the past few months, and we wanted to do a better job of opening the line of communication here and include you, ladies and gents, in our programs more.
And that's why we want to do a Q&A episode where we'll be answering your questions directly. Hopefully we won't regret this, but your questions can be a free for all. Whether you want to know more about the role of ketones in metabolism, Brianna's world champion rowing days and our time studying metabolism at Oxford, my 30-mile birthday run and my other biohacking experiments, questions about any HVMN product, entrepreneurship tips, startup tips, ask us anything.
Yes, anything. It's an open invite. So message us your questions at podcast@hvmn.com. We're going to collate them throughout this month and release the episode soon after that.
Again, thank you all for continuing to tune in. We're both excited to record this Q&A episode. And if it goes well and questions keep coming, perhaps we'll start including a regular Q&A segment in our normal programming. There's still a lot of room for this show to continue to grow, and we can't wait for you all to see what we have planned. Now, back to the podcast. So, we've been talking around wine, and obviously that's a big part of what you do now. And one of the initial questions coming into the space is that obviously from a biohacker performance perspective, ethanol, alcohol is not great for performance.
No question about it.
So I think that's just, maybe the elephant in the room. How do you reconcile that?
It's no elephant in the room for me.
Okay.
I will tell you that alcohol is a super dangerous neurotoxin. And there is no evidence to support that it enhances performance in any way. Right? That being said, it does enhance just one small area, which we'll talk about, which is creative expression and the access to being emotionally available. And so when we can increase our emotional availability to others, this is the reason people bond over alcohol, right? And many bromances are created around alcohol, right?
And so, romances.
To the extent that it is valuable just for that one area, but then it matters, then dosage matters, right? So dosage matters, quality matters. But the fact is that ethyl alcohol is a super dangerous neurotoxin that kills thousands of people every year and destroys the lives of tens of thousands of more, right? And so alcohol is something that we have to be extremely careful with. So it's always surprising to people to hear that that the wine guy says, hey, alcohol is a super dangerous neurotoxin. The fact of the matter is we have to be very careful with it, which is why we only drink and sell low alcohol wines, right? Alcohol levels in wine have risen steadily over the last 3 decades. So all wines, up until about 30 or 40 years ago, were in the similar alcohol range of, 11 to 12.5%. Today, average American wines are tipping out almost at 15%.
Yeah. That was my guess, 13, 16%, pretty common.
15% statistically. We don't sell any alcohol, any wine over 12.5%. And most of the wines I drink are between 10 and 11.5. So the amount of alcohol contained in a wine also has a significant impact on how the wine tastes. And so I just don't like the taste of alcohol, right? I don't really like alcohol at all. I just happen to love wine. And for wine to taste like wine, it's got to have a certain amount of alcohol in it. So the more alcohol you remove from the wine, the less it starts to taste like wine.
Turns into juice, basically.
Right. So basically, we sell wines between 6% and 12.5%. So once a wine gets below 9% in alcohol, it doesn't really start to taste like what you think of wine anymore. It starts to taste more like kombucha or sort of a fresh, light, kind of more watery type beverage. And typically it tastes better at lower alcohol if it's chilled, it doesn't matter what color it is, red or white. But the lower the alcohol, it's kind of more of a summer type. It's kind of a more refreshing. It's not like a fine wine experience.
Right.
The wine industry loves alcohol, which is the reason that alcohol levels have risen steadily over the last few decades. As I said, reaching nearly 15% as an average now. The wine industry loves alcohol for a few reasons. One, alcohol is addictive. Number two, it's what I call a domino drug. So just as the dominoes fall, so the more alcohol you drink, the more you want to drink, right? Same thing, cocaine is a domino drug, right? So it's like alcohol has this effect. And then the third reason is that it impairs our judgment. So as the dose level gets higher, then our judgment is impaired, which causes us to drink even more.
Yep.
Well, the wine industry wants you to drink more, and they want you to be addicted, right? And so that's the reason that alcohol levels are higher. And there's one other reason. So alcohol, the higher alcohol is in a wine, the more bold the wine will taste and the more rich the wine will taste. And sort of for the typical dead American palate, right, they need a bolder, richer wine in order to satisfy them because their palate's been killed by processed foods and sugar, right? So when you start eating a plant and fish-based diet and you start getting away from or any kind of reasonably clean diet and you get away from processed foods and sugar, then how you taste food will change significantly. You'll have a restoration of your taste sensory, right? And so you don't any longer want bold, rich foods. In fact, just the opposite. You want a lighter, cleaner palate. And so lower alcohol wines just taste fresher and cleaner and lighter. So, and I spend a lot of time when not selling wine, I spend a lot of time talking about how dangerous it is. I spend a lot of time telling people that, look, I'm a lifelong wine aficionado and I have a love affair and obsession with wines. I've been drinking wine since I was 9 years old. I love wine. But the fact of the matter is a biohacker and somebody who's interested in anti-aging and who's interested in extending my health span in addition to my lifespan. But I'm really more concerned with my health span. Mm-hmm. I want to stay healthier and both physically and cognitively as long as I can. I'm almost 60, right? And so it's really important to me to now think about that the next 60 years. and what that looks like. And so, cognitive performance and preservation is really, really important to me. And alcohol is very dangerous for your brain, right? And so I don't want to stop drinking. Maybe there's a case to be made that perhaps I'd be healthier if I didn't drink at all. And that may be true. I'm not going to debate that narrative, but I'm not going to stop drinking. I love drinking wine. And what I want to do is drink a healthier wine.
Got it.
And a lower alcohol wine and a sugar-free wine, right? And a wine without additives. So let me share with you one of the little-known dark secrets of the wine industry. There are 76 additives approved by the FDA for the use in winemaking. Now, and a list of some pretty nasty chemicals. You don't know about these additives because the wine industry has spent tens of millions of dollars in lobby money with their friends in Washington, D.C. to keep contents labeling off of wine. Wine is the only major food product without a contents label, and that's not an accident. The wine industry regularly lobbies to keep these efforts down to put a contents label on it because the wine industry does not want you to know what's really in it.
Right. Even like the carb content, it is always very interesting. Every other liquid, there's
fat, no nutritional
nutritional
profile required.
Yep.
And many wines contain sugar and a lot of sugar.
Added sugar?
No, it's not added. In the wine industry, it's known as RS or residual sugar. How sugar gets in wine is not added.
It's from the fruit itself.
It's from terminating the fermentation process before it completes a complete fermentation. So here's how wine is made. You've got the most common question that we get is, how is wine sugar-free? Well, because isn't there sugar in grape juice? Yes, it's teeming with sugar. So how wine is made is that you press the juice from the berries. And if you're making white wine, it's just free-run juice. And this is I'll just talk for a minute about how red wine becomes red and why red wines are generally thought to be healthier than white wines. Red wine gets its color from contact with the skins. So if you squeeze the juice from a red berry and juice from a white berry, both of them are clear. And red wine gets its color once the juice is pressed. The skins are added to the tank. That's also what gives red wine tannins. And it's also what gives red wine the significant increase in antioxidants and polyphenols and flavonoids. There are over 800 polyphenols in red wine, just over 200 in white wine. And so this is the reason red wine is thought to be healthier. The most famous and the best known of the polyphenols is resveratrol. That being said, so you squeeze the juice, you put it in a tank, and it's full of sugar. Yeast, either native or lab cultured, and we'll talk about this in a moment. Yeast is activated in the grape juice, and the yeast eats the sugar. The result of that is carbon dioxide and ethyl alcohol. Now, here's how sugar gets in wine. If the winemaker does not allow the fermentation to complete, and a completed fermentation means that the yeast eats all of the available sugar. And so then the wine is sugar-free. But what's happening in commercial wines is that the winemaker is introducing sulfur dioxide to the wine prior to the fermentation completing, leaving residual sugars behind in the wine. They do this for a number of reasons. Americans love sugar. They're addicted to sugar. And sugar gives wine more mouthfeel. It gives wine these long caramelly finishes that people love, right? That's glycerol in wine and sugar. And so it just gives it more mouth body and more lusciousness. even if you can't taste the sugar. So even as taste professionals, sometimes, wine will contain sugar. We can't taste it. Now, at a certain level, you'll be able to taste it, like in sweet wines or dessert wines or ice wines or these late harvest types of wine. Naturally, you can taste the sugar. But in standard red wines, because the acid levels are quite high, you may not be able to detect sugar on the palate for probably up to maybe 10 grams a liter, right? Commonly, we'll test a wine at 3 or 4 or 5 grams per liter of sugar and not be able to taste it. And we'll reject the wine from the lab test. So our process is that we first taste all natural wines, meaning they're additive-free, they're organically or biodynamically farmed, and they are fermented with wild native yeast. They're also unirrigated, meaning they're dry farmed. So these are our basic criteria. Then if we taste the wine and we like the aesthetic, then we take a lab sample. We send the sample to a certified third-party independent enologist who does a series of tests on the wine for us. Among the things we're looking for are sugar in the wine. There are many other things we're looking for, including alcohol. This is another little-known fact with the wine industry and the U.S. government. The alcohol stated on a bottle of wine is not required by law to be accurate. It's generally rounded down. So if it says 14% on the label, it can be as high as 15.5%, and that's legal.
Interesting. It's just a minimum. No one is enforcing it? Or?
There's zero enforcement around it.
Okay.
And oftentimes it's outside of even the 1.5 because nobody's enforcing that either. Right? And so oftentimes if you're drinking wine that says 14%, it's 16 or 16.5.
So you're doing like good third-party certificates of analysis.
So we have what we call the Dry Farms Wine Certification. And that certification comes with lab-tested quantifications, right? Mm-hmm. In addition to farming quantifications, then we also have these lab-tested quantifications. We're looking for pesticides. We're looking for mold, like mycotoxins, like ochratoxin A.
Yep.
We are looking for sugar. We're looking for alcohol. So there are, because we're biohackers, this isn't marketing spin. We didn't create this business to go out and be super successful entrepreneurs. We created the business because I was looking for a healthier way to drink.
Yeah. Right.
And so we drink the same wines that we sell, and we're super fanatic about our health and about biohacking. We're not only active in selling and evangelizing about healthy wines, but I and other members of the team also speak around the world on fasting, on meditation, on the ketogenic diet. Yep. We just presented last year in Amsterdam to the Quantified Self Conference on fasting and wine, and also just on fasting. We also actually did a wine fast, sort of as some comic relief. We did a 3-day wine and water fast.
Nice.
So, and reported the results of that, its impact on both blood glucose as well as ketones.
Interesting.
And there was a slight elevation in both on the wine-only fast, but not statistically, did not take us out of ketosis or have a statistical relevance on blood glucose, but there was just a slight elevation.
Yeah, I remember seeing this old school paper. If you only had an alcohol-heavy diet, you actually kickstart ketosis even more.
Right.
Which is, because alcohol, it just will shift the priority of your fueling, reserves.
Well, it's a substrate energy source. Once you start drinking alcohol, that's going to be your primary energy source until the body expels it and processes it. And you obviously discharge it through your urine eventually, which is another reason. I don't drink during the daytime. I don't recommend anybody else does either. It's very common for people to have wine at lunch. I don't recommend it. It's going to shut down fat burning. So if fat burning is your objective, you don't want to be drinking anything.
Yep.
Because fat burning is going to shut down.
Yeah, anything exogenous is going to halt your internal fat burn, which makes sense. I wanted to circle back to one point you made. So your wines are low sugar because you don't stop the yeast fermentation process through an additive like a sulfur dioxide. So for avoidance of doubt or clarity, you essentially let the yeast run all the way through, basically ferment all the sugar, and they essentially kill themselves because they run out of food. And then you have very low amount of sugar, residual sugar, and you prove that with your third-party analysis.
So we do a lab test. We do not accept wines that exceed 0.9%, so less than 1 gram per liter, which is statistically sugar-free at the serving level.
Yeah.
Right? So most of our wines are like 0.2, 0.3 tenths of 1 point of 1 gram. So they're statistically sugar-free. It's just barely it's barely measurable, and it's not statistically important.
Right.
Commonly for store-bought wines, you will see sugar content from 5 to 50 grams per liter, right?
Wow.
So very common, 10, 15, 20 grams per liter. To give you a perspective, Coca-Cola is 32 grams per liter. And wines categorically can range from 0, as in the case of our wines, up to 300 grams per liter for a dessert wine or an ice wine. Now, those wines are super, super sweet. They taste super, super sweet. But you can get these store-bought wines quite commonly that contain 10, 15, 20 grams per liter, which is more sugar than I want to consume.
Yeah.
One other point that we mentioned just briefly I want to touch on, the difference between natural wines and conventional wines that you would see in your store. And there are only about 1,000 natural wine farmers in the world, right? Is the fermentation with wild native yeast. So this is one of the hallmarks of what a natural wine is versus a conventional wine. Again, the differences are farming practices. So all natural wines are always organically or biodynamically grown. In our case, they're also non-irrigated. Less than 1% of all U.S. vineyards are unirrigated. Irrigation is largely a United States idea. Irrigation leads to higher yields and heavier fruit sold by the ton.
Okay.
And when you fill a grape berry with water, it weighs more.
Right.
That's why you irrigate. Irrigation is illegal in most of Europe. We don't even sell any domestic wines. There are no wines made in the United States. So
how do you water the plants then if it's not through irrigation?
They get water from
like rainfall.
From rainfall.
Okay.
And from breaking apart tiny pieces of soil and rock and mineral in search of minute amounts of moisture.
So you're not adding any water external from?
No, there's no external water at all.
Interesting.
Grapevines have been living on the earth for over 10,000 years, and they've never been irrigated. Grapevines weren't irrigated in the United States until 1973. Now virtually everything is irrigated in the United States. I live in the wine country. There's virtually no dry farming up there. And if you drive up there, you'll see irrigation hoses on every single vineyard.
Okay, so when you say dry farm, you literally mean no external water. You're just having
dry
it
farming
live
means
off the
no
rainfall.
irrigation. No irrigation.
Natural rainfall, natural rainfall, humidity in the dirt.
Look, dry farming is more expensive. It's more difficult. It requires a lot more effort.
Yeah, makes sense.
And so it also has a tremendous impact not only on the quality of the fruit, but also the health and the polyphenols inside the fruit. So irrigated fruit, which is diluted with water to cause it to weigh more, also dilutes the polyphenols in the fruit. So not only is it unhealthy for the planet, it's unhealthy for the vine, it's also less healthy for you drinking it, right? But back to the yeast. So on the skin of every grape in the world is native wild yeast. It collects on the skin. It looks like a whitish kind of waxy surface on the grape. You can see it.
Yep.
That's yeast, and it's collected in the air. So natural wines are fermented with wild native yeast that are indigenous to every vineyard, right? Commercial wines, no. Commercial wines or conventional wines, those that are not natural, are fermented with lab-grown, genetically modified yeast. These lab-cultured yeast have a few distinct advantages for the winemaker. So they're very sturdy, right? So they're modified to be sturdy and strong. Wild native yeasts are very temperamental. They're very difficult to work with, and you can't make wine in very large quantities with a wild native yeast. It's too unstable. It's also, wild native yeast will die at higher alcohol levels. And so these genetically modified lab cultured yeast are designed to withstand high alcohol environments. It says so right on the package, right? And number 3, they can be modified to have certain flavor profiles. So let's say that you're growing grapes in the Central Valley of California, but you want to make a wine that tastes like it's from Italy. Well, there's a yeast for that, right? And so these are the reasons that these commercial yeast are used almost exclusively. You could all but say 100% of conventional wines are always fermented with these genetically modified lab cultured yeast. Now, we don't know what that means for your health. We know that when you drink natural wines, for sure, you feel better, right? It's probably a combination, in our case, of lower alcohol, of non-irrigation, of no additives, of not high doses of sulfur dioxide, which are sulfites in wine. All wines, whether they have added sulfur or not, contain sulfites. All fermented foods have sulfites. They're a part of the fermentation process. So even when you get a bottle of wine from us, even though we're testing for sulfites to make sure that they've not been added, there's sulfite in all wine. Yeah. It's naturally occurring, but it'll be very, very low amounts. You'll see typically 2 to 10 parts per million of sulfites in naturally fermented wine without added sulfites. Sulfites can be as high as 75 parts per million without added sulfite. Anything over 75 parts has definitely been added.
And the rationale for adding sulfites would be what, flavor or?
Greed. So it's very simple. So what sulfur dioxide does is sterilize the wine.
Okay.
And sulfur dioxide can be added by conventional winemakers at several points in the process. The first point where it can be added, or is usually added, is at the time of pressing. They use sulfur dioxide to kill the native yeast. You can't have the native yeast and the commercial yeast present at the same time, right? So you use sulfur dioxide.
It would be an inconsistent product,
well, it
right?
just won't. You will have a broken fermentation. Yeah. So the first thing you do is you sterilize the wine. You kill all the available native yeast. Then you inoculate it with these genetically modified commercial yeast, right? That's the first time it's used. The second time it can be used, and is often used, is to stop the fermentation process, as we talked about earlier, to kill the commercial yeast, leaving behind residual sugar. And the third time that is used, and used in the biggest dose, is at bottling. And the reason it's used at bottling is to sterilize the wine. There's a number of problems with this. When you sterilize the wine, or what we call kill the wine or mummify it, so you can McDonald'ize it, right? So you create this consistent shelf product that's very stable, right? That can withstand shipping irregularities and can withstand sitting on shelves for very long periods of times in unstable environments and temperature swings and all kinds. You sterilize the wine to kill any remaining bacteria in the wine. Now, natural wines are not sterilized. When you sterilize the wine in a commercial wine, you end up with this very McDonaldized kind of shelf-consistent product that's super, super stable, right? You've also killed all of the gut-friendly bacteria that exist in wine. So Dr. David Perlmutter just wrote a recent post about the gut-friendly bacterias that are in natural wines. He, among hundreds of other health leaders, endorsed our wines for this reason, for the reasons I've described to you already. But in addition to inside natural wines are living bacteria. And when you sterilize the wine, this is the other reason that natural wines taste better and are more interesting is that when you sterilize the wine with the sulfur dioxide, you're also killing the soul of the wine. You're killing this taste, this magic that is this living organism, these bacteria that are in natural wine, which just tastes more interesting and tastes better, right? And so you're killing this, what we call the soul of the wine, right? In addition to you're killing all this bacteria that makes the wine healthier. So natural wines, so that's where commercial wines see their biggest dose of sulfur dioxide. And so sulfur can range in commercial wines from, 75 to 100 parts up to 350 parts per million is the legal limit.
Interesting.
We will not accept a wine over 75 parts because it can be as high as 75 parts naturally occurring, but most of the wines that we test, most of them are between 5 and 25 parts per million, most.
So that's interesting in terms of when you with the natural one, you have these living bacteria in there processing away. And obviously you hear in the news of these aged 30+ year wines that are thousands, tens of thousands of dollars per bottle. Curious how being a natural wine, how does that product age while you're in that shelf?
90% of wines are consumed within 24 hours of purchase. That's just a statistical fact.
Makes sense.
And probably another 9.9% are consumed within a month of purchase, right? So this concept that people are aging wine is, for most people, is not true. I don't know anybody in the health circle who ages wine. I do know some collectors, but those are kind of cult wines and become, at times, investments.
Yep.
Right? Our wines are quite affordable. We don't sell expensive wine.
Okay.
We don't sell wine that is meant to be aged in a cellar, although natural wines will age fine for a number of years. But the wines we sell are meant to be consumed.
Okay.
They're fresh. They're alive. They're living, right? And so we're not really selling a collectible. Our wines average $22 per bottle, which is quite affordable for a handcrafted fine wine experience.
Yeah.
Right? So we're not selling a collectible thing. We're in the health food business. We just happen to sell wine.
Got it.
Right? And so, and the wine we sell, we want you to drink and enjoy.
Makes sense.
Let me talk for a minute about how alcohol can be an enhancement to your life and can be an enhancement to performance, as I mentioned earlier, and only in this one area. And that is in creative expression. So when we have low doses of alcohol, we become a little bit more creative in our thought.
At least you're less inhibited.
Right. We're less inhibited. We're less fearful. We're also more emotionally available. And this is a really, really, really important thing. When we become more emotionally available, then we spread and collect and generate more love. Our heart is open. We are just more available. And so when we can create love, I believe that we are wired to love and be loved, right? And so wine brings more love in our life, right? Again, if I'm going to drink wine, then I want to drink lower doses of alcohol, and I want to drink a wine that's healthier, right? And so, but this creative expression, and it rolls down that window of vulnerability just a little bit and makes us a little more accessible. And anytime we can be more vulnerable, we're going to engender more trust with people. Trust is, from my perspective, the only real currency left in the world. Money's not a very valuable currency. Trust is. And, we develop and engender more trust when we're more available. And when we stop hiding and start showing up, this is particularly important for men, who need to find the confidence and self-awareness to rip off that mask of masculinity that was glued onto them when they were children, with this expectation of being strong and
stoic
and the lion. When we can remove all this falseness that interrupted the innocence of our birthright, the innocence that we were born with. We were born only fearing falling or loud noises. The rest of these things that we learn, this mask that we put on. When we can become more available, this generates love and trust and connection with people.
Yeah.
Wine is very helpful in that. As is any low dose of alcohol, but wine is just more magical in so many ways, particularly living wines, natural wines that have this kind of energy in the bottle, and you can taste it and feel it. And so it's just more uplifting. The buzz is more energized, but not as heavy. Like when I drink a commercial wine, I feel like I've been slugged in the head with some kind of blunt object, right? And so these living wines are
or definitely you feel that when you take a shot of vodka or something.
Right. I mean, alcohol is, like the reason that natural wines taste better with food as well. Alcohol is not friendly to food, right? I mean, you don't have a vodka with a salad,
right?
I mean, so alcohol doesn't taste good. So you got to get this very low dose, and then it becomes a lot more food friendly.
Makes sense. I mean, it sounds like you're very quantified in terms of the health span equation. If you can get the emotional benefits from this wine and you control the negative aspects of it by lowering all the additives and all the processed stuff in terms of why you wouldn't want too much ethanol in your life, can you find this happy medium where you get the benefits of alcohol without the downside? Or are you finding
it's pretty low dose though. I mean, and here's the other thing. I mean, even if when you think about drinking, most people don't have a glass of wine. They have several.
Yeah.
And so it's really important, particularly if you're a regular wine drinker, I mean, it's really important to lower down the inherent amount of wine, the inherent amount of alcohol in the wine, which is why it's really super important to drink low alcohol wines. Because I don't care whether it's 16% or 11%, you're not likely to have a glass.
Yeah.
You're likely to have several. And again, because of this domino effect that alcohol has, the higher it is and the more likely you are to drink more.
Yep.
Right? And so we want to give you an experience that allows you to have more than a glass, that allows you to still maintain control over that domino effect.
Yeah.
So that you can enjoy all of the positive benefits of drinking wine without any of the negative remnants.
Yeah, that makes sense. I want to circle back just a little bit on the entrepreneurial business side of things. So it sounds like you went from realizing that you had this early passion for wine and then the existing wines did not meet your standard in terms of performance or biohacking or your lifespan, health span goals. How did that become, did you have a background in winemaking? Did you have a background in wine country to go to start executing on making this possible?
Lots of people who live in Napa Valley experiment with winemaking at some point. I had made wine back in 2005, but it was just kind of a hobby project.
Yeah.
I consider hobby wine, anytime you make wine, you lose money doing it, right? It's just a hobby. So, and I only made a single vintage and really didn't even know much about it. Employed a winemaker to make it. But that really had anything to do with it is really my history with biohacking. So I had adapted a ketogenic diet. And as my nutrition got super dialed in, I found I couldn't drink commercial wines anymore. They're making me feel bad. I was having negative remnants from them. They were taking me out of ketosis. I couldn't drink conventional wines anymore.
Yeah.
Didn't like the way they tasted. As my palate was changing, and so I thought it was just the high alcohol. So I initially, as I started to biohack wine, as Dave Asprey says, the Dry Farm Wines is the fanatic biohacker of wine.
Yeah.
As we started to biohack wine, it was like, I thought it was just high alcohol. So I asked a friend of mine who I think is the smartest person in the wine business, I was like, I want to make some low alcohol wine. How low can I get the alcohol and still have it taste like wine? We talked about that. And in the course of that conversation, he said, have you tasted any of the low alcohol wines coming out of Europe? And I was like, had no idea what you're talking about.
Yeah.
So I went down to here in San Francisco to the kind of prestigious wine store here on 4th Street called K&L.
Yeah.
I go down to K&L and I walk in and I was like, could you show me some low alcohol wines? And the salesperson looked at me like I had a third eye. And because I'm sure I'm the only person that ever went in the store asking for low alcohol wines, right? And so in that process, he's like, well, you can turn it around. I didn't even know at that time that what was stated on the bottle wasn't required to be accurate, but you can just look at the bottle and you'll have to choose. So I chose some and I bought like a case and I took them home. Nothing over 12.5% was where I decided the kind of demarcation was. And I took them home and I poured about 75% of it down the sink. It wasn't drinkable, right? I kind of do the same thing again, but I go to this organic market called Buy Right, and who I didn't know at the time, but most of Buy Right's wines happen to be natural wines. They're organic. Not all organic wines are natural, but all natural wines are organic. But it just so happened most of theirs were also natural, whether that was intentional or just because they were all organic, I don't know. But so I bought another case of these low alcohol wines. I took them home and I discovered that there's this one importer from Paris who I'm liking all of their wines. Like I like the taste, I like the aesthetic, and they're also low alcohol. So I call him up. Turns out it's an American living in Paris. And I learned from him that he tells me about natural wines. He's like, well, all of our wines are natural. I was like, well, aren't all wines natural? And he said, well, no, they're not. And here are the quantifications that make a wine natural. And so what I did next did have something to do with my history and of having made wine. What I did next was, because I was ketogenic and super interested in sugar contents, and I knew you could test for sugar in wine lab. So I then took samples of the wines I liked most and I sent them to a lab. And then I started quantifying lab results with the aesthetic of wines that I liked and started to find this kind of formula for quantifying wine. Right. And so to that extent, my previous experience of living in Napa Valley and also making wine, I knew I had used these analogous labs before.
And this is still hobby mode. This is still just like, I want to
this is still experience. This is just me like trying to figure out how to drink. This is not a business.
Yeah, this is hobby mode.
And I'm sharing it with some biohacking friends of mine. This one friend in particular who he and I drank quite a bit together. So who was an extreme biohacker and cyclist and athlete. I started sharing these wines with him. He's also super foodie and interested in taste. And I started sharing these wines with him and he was like, wow, dude, this is like amazing. Like where can you buy these wines? And I was like, well, you can't, right? I mean, you could, but you wouldn't know what they were.
Right.
Right. And so from that, it was like, from there, I contacted Dave Asprey of Bulletproof, and we became shortly thereafter decided to try to make it a business, and we became the only alcohol that he's ever really endorsed and the only alcohol ever at the Bulletproof conference, and we became kind of the official wine of Bulletproof, and that was sort of the beginning. And after that, I was a guest on his podcast, and I've been a guest on hundreds, and telling the story of additives and why you should drink low alcohol and why natural farming matters and why irrigation is important, and trying to educate people on just how to have a healthier drinking experience.
No, very cool. I've only had alcohol once so far in 2019, and it was a couple glasses of wine. But I'm excited. I'll be interested to try yours and see how that goes. What are the big things on your roadmap in 2019 and beyond? I mean, where do you see this going?
Our business continues to explode because you feel better. There's no negative remnants. So our wine business is extremely robust and continues to be explosive in its growth. But personally, as I mentioned to you before we started recording, I have recently began a experiment with fasting that I'm super excited about. So 2019 for me is really the year of fasting experiments. My current experiment is that I'm not eating on Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesdays, or Monday, Tuesday until Wednesday night. So I'm doing a 3-day fast every week. And then I'll continue eating only once per day on the remaining days. But this year is just, I'm going to also experiment with after this experiment, I'm going to experiment with eating every other day. So I just wanted, this is kind of my year of fasting experiments. Fasting has just been such a radical advancement in my wellness and I think anti-aging for me that I'm just really curious to explore what might be the optimal formula for me.
Yeah.
I'm very excited about the current experiment, not eating between Sunday and Wednesday.
Yeah.
So that's going to be, I think, most of my focus of
we'll have to stay in touch to see how that goes. And I know that we have a special a link out for our HVMN and dry farm wines.
We do. We have a special offer for your audience. It's a penny bottle of wine. They can find that offer at dryfarmwines.com/HVMN. That's dryfarmwines.com/HVMN. And then on all social media, we're Dry Farm Wines, so we're pretty easy to find.
Cool. All right, thanks, Todd. Well, I'd love to follow the fasting journey and the wine journey, so appreciate you coming in.
Let's catch up again on fasting.
All right, yeah.
Thanks, man.
Thanks so much.
Thanks so much for tuning in this week, everyone. If you want to learn more about HVMN and our offerings, visit www.hvmn.com/pod. Also, by writing a review on our iTunes page and sending a screenshot to podcast@hvmn.com, we'll hook you up with $15 worth of HVMN store credit. Our last shout out goes to our listener survey, which lets us know who you are better so we can continue making episodes that you find most valuable. So visit go.hvmn.com